Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world. This episode analyzes Project 2025's mandate for leadership as a governance architecture, how an administration attempts to pre-assemble authority, personnel, and policy execution before taking office.
It's good to be here. And I think it's really important right at the top to set the stage for what this analysis is and what it isn't.
Absolutely.
We're seeing this topic generate a lot of heat, a lot of debate in the media, but we are not here today to debate the politics of it. This isn't about right versus left.
Yeah.
And we're definitely not here to make predictions about elections or to pass any kind of moral judgment on the content itself.
Exactly. We're systems analysts. We're looking at the machine. The blueprints are on the table. And our job for you is to pop the hood and really trace how this engine is designed to run.
That's the perfect metaphor. This is a structural analysis. We're interested in the plumbing, the wiring of the executive branch.
So let's start there. Let's orient everyone. What exactly is this document? I mean, physically, what are we even talking about? I feel like most people have heard the name, maybe seen a headline.
But they haven't held it in their hands.
Right, they haven't seen the object itself.
Physically, it's a doorstop. I mean, it's massive. The official title is Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. And it is well over 900 pages long.
Wow. 900 pages.
And it was produced by the Heritage Foundation. But what's really crucial to understand is that it's not just them. This is a coalition effort. I think the latest count is over 50 different partner organizations.
So this is not one person's manifesto written in a cabin somewhere. This isn't some angry blog post.
Not even close.
Yeah.
It's an institutional product. You should think of it as representing a broad consensus across a very wide spectrum of the conservative legal and policy world.
Okay, an institutional product. And you've said before that the book itself is just one piece of the puzzle.
That's maybe the most important thing to grasp right away. This book, as huge as it is only one part of a much larger system. The text itself actually refers to 4 pillars.
4 pillars. Okay, let's unpack that. Because normally when a campaign puts out a plan, it's a PDF you download from their website, it's got some bullet points on taxes or whatever. This feels different.
It is entirely different in scope and intent. So Pillar 1 is the book. That's the policy guide, the 900 pages we're digging into today.
Yeah.
It gives you these incredibly detailed chapter-by-chapter breakdowns of every single federal agency.
Every agency, from the Department of Defense down to the National Endowment for the Arts.
Everything. But then you have Pillar 2, and Pillar 2 is a personnel database.
A database?
Yes. Think of it as a massive private LinkedIn, but exclusively for ideological loyalists. They're collecting resumes right now, not waiting until after an election.
So it's not just about finding someone who knows how to, say, manage a budget.
It's not. The source material is very clear about the vetting process. They are screening for what they call philosophical alignment. Technical competence is, a factor, but the alignment seems to be the gatekeeper.
I want to dig into that for a second. LinkedIn for loyalists. What does that mean in practice? If I'm an expert in, agricultural policy and I want a job in a new administration, I don't just go to the public jobs website.
In the model proposed here, no. You would enter through this centralized portal. The idea is to solve a very specific problem that, in their view, plagued the 2016 transition.
Which was what?
The text argues that in 2016, the administration came in unprepared. They had to hire people off the street or rely on the so-called Washington establishment to fill thousands of roles.
And the argument is those people weren't loyal enough.
They argue those people actively blocked or slow-walked the president's agenda. So Pillar 2 is about having a pre-vetted army, literally thousands of people ready to be deployed on day 1, January 20th.
It sounds like a menu where every single dish has already been taste tested for ideological purity.
That's a very good way to put it. And that brings us to Pillar 3, the Administration Academy.
An academy. It sounds like a university.
It's less like a university and more like intensive corporate onboarding, but for taking over the federal government.
Okay.
It's made up of online training modules, in-person seminars, and the entire goal is to train these potential appointees on how the government actually functions, the deep mechanics of it, and more specifically, how to make it function the way they want it to.
That's fascinating because the implication there is that usually people who get these political appointments, they don't actually know how the machine works when they show up.
That is very often true. You might have a big donor or a campaign surrogate get appointed to a high-level role, but they have no idea what the Administrative Procedure Act is. They don't know the arcane rules for publishing a regulation in the Federal Register.
So the academy is designed to eliminate that learning curve.
Exactly. So they can be effective from their perspective from the moment they walk in the door. No fumbling around for the light switch.
Which leaves us with Pillar 4.
Pillar 4 is the playbook. And this is the most operational part. These are the agency-specific transition plans. We're talking about the confidential drafts of executive orders, day one memos from cabinet secretaries, proclamation drafts, all just sitting there, waiting for a signature.
So to summarize the 4 pillars, you have the book, which is the what, you have the database, which is the who, the academy is the how-to, and the playbook is the doing.
Perfectly put. The book tells you what to do. The playbook is the actual doing of it.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, the entire argument of this massive project is that transition planning, as it's normally done, is a complete failure. It happens way too late.
Explicitly. The foreword of the book argues that in recent election cycles, candidates don't really start this deep planning until late spring of the election year. They call that a fatal mistake.
Why fatal?
They say the federal government is just too complex, too massive, too entrenched. If you wait until you win the election to figure out who's going to run the Department of Energy or what your first move at the EPA is, the bureaucracy will, and I quote, eat you alive.
So the goal is pre-assembly.
Pre-assembly. They want the entire federal machinery, the people, the policies, the legal orders, all assembled, vetted, trained, and ready to go before the inauguration even happens.
Which brings us to the core problem this whole 900-page manual is trying to solve. As you read through it, there's a recurring villain. And it's not a political party. It's not another country.
No. The primary adversary on almost every single page of this text is what they call the administrative state.
The bureaucracy. But let's define that term, because bureaucracy gets thrown around a lot. For most people, that just means, long lines at the DMV. What does the mandate mean when it talks about the administrative state?
It's a very specific definition for them. They're referring to the permanent professional class of career civil servants who run the government day to day, regardless of who is in the White House.
So the scientists at the EPA, the lawyers at the Department of Justice, the intelligence analysts at the State Department.
Precisely. The document argues that these people, who are protected by civil service laws and tenure, have a built-in ideological bias and will often slow roll, block, or actively sabotage the directives of a duly elected president.
So they see the government not as a tool they've just inherited, but as a hostile territory that they have to conquer.
I think that's a very accurate way to frame their perspective. The text treats the federal government not as a neutral service provider, but as a landscape occupied by an opposing force, the permanent bureaucracy.
So this document at its core is a blueprint for overcoming what they see as bureaucratic inertia.
It's more than that. It's about fundamentally re-engineering the system. It's a guide on how to convert executive branch independence into executive branch subservience to the White House. It's about stripping away all the insulation that has been built up over a century to protect career staff from direct political control.
Okay, that's a fantastic high-level orientation. Now I want to get into the gears of the machine. How is this system actually designed to work? As I was going through the source material, I kept seeing a few key mechanisms pop up over and over again. The first one, and maybe the most famous one, is this phrase, personnel is policy.
It is the absolute engine of the entire system. That phrase, personnel is policy, is repeated like a mantra throughout the text.
What does that mean?
It means that the long-held idea of neutral competence, the notion that a civil servant can just do their job professionally regardless of who the president is a myth. They argue that's impossible. Yes. They argue that everyone has an ideology, everyone has a worldview. And if you leave a supposedly neutral expert in charge of a program, they will inevitably impose their own, what the text would call, liberal or technocratic bias on the outcome.
Okay, but let me push back on that for a moment, just to play devil's advocate. Isn't the whole point of an election that the winner gets to run the government? It sounds like basic democracy, doesn't it? If I win, I get to pick my team. Why shouldn't a president be able to fire people who disagree with them?
And that is exactly the argument the text makes. They say the permanent bureaucracy is fundamentally undemocratic because nobody ever voted for that mid-level analyst at the EPA.
Right.
But here's the crucial historical context you have to understand. The modern U.S. system was designed, specifically after the Pendleton Act of 1883, to prevent what was called the spoils system.
The spoils system, that's the old 19th century model where if you helped the president get elected, he made you the postmaster of your town even if you couldn't read an address.
Correct. It was rife with corruption and incompetence. So we moved to a merit system where most federal employees are hired based on qualifications and exams. And critically, they're given job protections. They have tenure. They can't be fired just because the party in the White House changes.
And the purpose of that is stability.
Stability and expertise. It ensures that when a new president comes in, the nuclear power plants are still being inspected by people who actually understand nuclear physics, not just people who donated a lot of money to the campaign.
And the mandate directly challenges this century-old system.
It challenges the scope of it. It doesn't propose abolishing the entire civil service, but it does call for reinstating and dramatically expanding something called Schedule F.
Schedule F. It sounds like a tax form, but I get the feeling it's a lot more significant than that.
It is arguably the central mechanism in the entire document. It's a classification for federal employees. Historically, the civil service is divided into a few categories. You have the competitive service, those are the merit-based folks we just talked about with tenure. Then you have the accepted service. This was originally a very small group of jobs, confidential assistants, policy advisors, people who, by the nature of their role, need to be politically aligned with the president.
So Schedule F plays with that definition.
It takes a sledgehammer to it. Schedule F is an executive order mechanism that would allow a president to reclassify tens of thousands of those career positions into this accepted service.
Tens of thousands. Which positions?
Any position deemed to have a policy determining, policy-making, or policy advocating role.
That sounds incredibly broad. I mean, if I'm a government lawyer writing a legal memo that informs a policy decision, am I policy determining?
Under the interpretation laid out in this text, almost certainly yes.
Right. Okay.
And the moment your job is reclassified under Schedule F, you become an at-will employee.
Meaning?
Meaning you lose your tenure protections. You can be fired by the president or his political appointees at any time, for any reason or for no reason at all. Poor performance, lack of alignment, or simply because they want to give your job to someone from that Pillar 2 personnel database.
So, structurally speaking, you're taking this thick layer of government that was designed to be permanent and insulated, sort of an institutional insurance policy against chaos and corruption, and you're making it completely responsive and removable.
That's it, exactly. The incentive it creates is, well, you could say it's alignment, or you could say it's fear. It creates a workforce that serves strictly at the pleasure of the president.
And the predictable outcome is?
Rapid implementation of orders. If a cabinet secretary says, jump, the staff doesn't say, well, let's look at the regulations from 1982 to see if that's advisable. They just say, how high? Because if they don't, they know they can be replaced tomorrow by someone who will.
Now, the obvious criticism of this is that you're purging expertise. You're losing decades of institutional memory.
And that's the trade-off. If you fire the career experts who know why a specific nuclear regulatory code was written 30 years ago because they aren't aligned enough, that knowledge walks out the door. The document, however, seems to see this as a feature, not a bug. It explicitly states that vetting for loyalty is paramount, arguing that expertise without loyalty is just a more effective form of obstruction.
Okay, so you have this newly compliant workforce, but that's still thousands and thousands of people. How does a White House actually control them? That brings us to what I saw as Mechanism B, the aggressive centralization of command.
Right. Even if everyone is loyal, you need a chain of command. And this is where the architecture gets really interesting. The text details the role of the White House office, or WHO. It argues the WHO can't just be a support staff. It has to be the beating heart of all executive power.
But the real enforcer in this model, the name that comes up again and again, isn't in the White House itself. It's the OMB.
The Office of Management and Budget, yes.
And when most people think of the OMB, they think of, accountants with green visors, the math geeks who just make sure the numbers add up in the federal budget.
And that's the perception lag we talk about. That's the old model. In this new governance architecture, the OMB is air traffic control for the entire executive branch.
Air traffic control.
The text, specifically the chapter written by former OMB Director Russ Vought, argues that the OMB must be the primary enforcer of the president's commander's intent.
Commander's intent. That's military language.
It is, and it's used deliberately. The idea is that the OMB's job is not just to balance the checkbook. Its job is to be the political enforcer for the White House. Think of it this way. If any agency, say the Department of Transportation, wants to do anything significant, it must first get permission from the OMB.
Anything? Like what?
Issue a new regulation. Spend a large sum of money that's already been appropriated by Congress. Even send a written testimony up to Capitol Hill for a hearing.
Wait, so if the Secretary of Transportation is called to testify before Congress about, say, bridge safety. He has to get his prepared remarks approved by the OMB first.
In this model, absolutely. His testimony has to be consistent with commander's intent. The text explicitly calls for creating a one OMB structure, which is designed to prevent agencies from hiding information from the White House, or worst, going native and colluding with Congress behind the president's back.
So the OMB becomes this universal choke point. It centralizes all discretion that used to live out in the agencies and pulls it directly into the White House complex.
That's the design. No agency is allowed to go rogue.
Okay, but there's still a constraint on all of this, a very big one written into the Constitution: the Senate. The president appoints his top officers, but he needs the advice and consent of the Senate to confirm them. And that process can take months, sometimes even years. It's a huge bottleneck.
It is. And the document is very candid about this. It acknowledges that the Senate confirmation process is, in their words, slow, broken, and often obstructionist. They know they can't get 4,000 political appointees confirmed in the first year.
So what's the workaround? This leads to Mechanism C, what I started calling the acting loophole.
That's a good name for it. The document advises a very specific strategy. Place political appointees into acting or principal deputy roles immediately on day one.
How does that work legally? Can the president just snap his fingers and say, "You're now the acting Secretary of Defense"?
There's a law called the Federal Vacancies Reform Act that governs this. It's complicated, but in essence, it allows temporary officials to fill vacant senior positions for a certain period of time, often for hundreds of days, while a nomination is pending or even before one is made.
And the text lays out a strategy to exploit this.
A very clear one. The strategy is, you don't nominate your preferred candidate for cabinet secretary and then wait 6 months for a hearing while the office sits empty or is run by a careerist. Instead, you appoint your loyalist as, say, the principal deputy assistant secretary, a position that often doesn't require Senate confirmation. Then, if the top spot is vacant, that deputy can, under the Vacancies Act, automatically become the acting head of the agency.
It's a constitutional hack. It's a workaround.
It is a clear workaround. The practical effect is that you can have a shadow government of your chosen people running the agencies from the moment you take office, regardless of what the Senate thinks or does.
So you could have unconfirmed loyalists running huge swaths of the federal government for a year or more.
Precisely. It effectively bypasses the legislative check on executive personnel. The text is not subtle about this. It says, and I'm paraphrasing here, the Senate is a significant hurdle, and the next administration must be prepared to bypass it wherever necessary.
Let's try to map this out visually for everyone listening. I want to really understand the ecosystem that this document describes. If we treat this like a battlefield, as the text seems to, who are the actors on the board?
The text uses very martial language, so that's a good way to frame it. You basically have two main camps. First, you have the politicals, this is the cadre, and the text uses that specific word, cadre, of vetted appointees from the personnel database. They are, in essence, the invading force.
And on the other side?
On the other side, you have the careerists. That's the permanent staff, the scientists, the lawyers, the program managers who have been at their agencies for 10, 20, 30 years. In this worldview, they are the entrenched occupiers who need to be displaced, controlled, or bypassed.
And the text mentions a very specific role that acts as a bridge, or maybe a guard, between these two groups. The White House liaison.
Yes. The role of the White House liaison is elevated to a position of critical importance in this manual. In many past administrations, this was a relatively low-level job. Someone who helps with scheduling, maybe hands out White House visitor passes for agency staff.
But not here.
Not here. In this model, the White House liaison is effectively a political commissar.
A commissar, that's a very loaded term.
It fits the function that's described. These are political appointees embedded in every single agency, the EPA, the State Department, everywhere. But here's the key. They don't report to the head of that agency. They report directly back to the White House Office of Presidential Personnel.
So their loyalty isn't to the secretary of their department, it's to the president's office.
Exclusively. Their job is to be the eyes and ears of the president inside the agency, to monitor for any signs that the cabinet secretary is being captured by their own bureaucracy.
Being captured. That implies that if a secretary of, say, agriculture spends too much time with the actual agriculture experts, they might start, what, agreeing with them, going native?
Exactly. They might start thinking like a creature of their agency instead of an agent of the president. The liaison is there to ensure that the commander's intent remains pure and is being executed without deviation.
Okay, so that's the landscape. But what about the constraints? Even with loyalists and commissars, you can't just rule by decree. There are laws, right?
There are. And the biggest legal constraint is the Administrative Procedure Act, the APA. This is the law from the 1940s that dictates how federal agencies make new rules. It's designed to be slow and deliberative.
The whole notice and comment period.
Right. You have to publish a proposed rule. You have to accept and respond to public comments. You have to justify your final rule with a mountain of data and legal analysis. You can't just scribble a new regulation on a napkin. The text spends a lot of time figuring out how to navigate or speed up this process.
And one of the tools they focus on is something called guidance documents.
This is a really subtle but powerful feedback loop in the system. A formal regulation can take years to finalize. A guidance document, on the other hand, is basically just a memo from an agency explaining how it interprets an existing law. It's not a new law itself, and it can be issued very quickly.
So what's the strategy here?
It's an asymmetric strategy. The text proposes using these fast-track guidance documents aggressively to deregulate, essentially issuing memos that say, we will no longer enforce this old rule, or we interpret this law to not apply to these industries.
So use the fast lane to get rid of rules.
Exactly. While at the same time, the plan calls for strictly limiting the ability of agencies to use guidance to create new regulatory burdens on businesses. So it's a one-way street. It turns the administrative process, the bureaucracy, against itself.
I want to shift now to what we've been calling the translation layer. This, to me, is the most fascinating part of the whole document. This is where the rubber meets the road. Ideology is one thing. It's easy to say we believe in national sovereignty or we believe in deregulation. But this manual is obsessed with translating those abstract values into very specific, concrete, bureaucratic actions.
Yes. This is the core of the machine. It's the process for converting belief into bureaucracy. And the text gives us incredibly detailed agency-by-agency case studies of how this translation is supposed to work.
Let's walk through a few of them. Let's start with a big one. Case study number 1, the Department of Justice, the DOJ.
Okay. The driving ideology for the DOJ chapter is a strong interpretation of the unitary executive theory.
Which means?
It means the president, as the head of the executive branch, has absolute and total control over it. Therefore, the very idea of an independent Department of Justice is, in this view, a constitutional fiction.
We're always told there's a firewall, that the White House shouldn't interfere in specific DOJ investigations.
The mandate argues that firewall is not only a fiction, it's an improper one. It argues the president is the nation's chief law enforcement officer. So how does that translate into an administrative directive, an org chart change?
Right. How do you do it?
The text explicitly proposes restructuring the FBI. Currently, the director of the FBI reports up through the Deputy Attorney General, who is traditionally a career professional. There's a layer of insulation there.
Okay.
Project 2025 proposes moving the FBI to be under the direct supervision of various political assistant attorneys general.
That sounds technical, but what does it mean in the real world?
It means you're removing that professional buffer. You are placing the nation's top federal law enforcement agency directly under the supervision of political appointees who are much closer to the White House. But it goes further. The text also proposes that the new leadership should review all ongoing investigations and prosecutions.
Review them for what?
And terminate any that are deemed to be contrary to administration policy.
Wow, let that sink in. That implies that a president could order a stop to an investigation not because of a lack of evidence, but because it's politically inconvenient.
From the perspective of the manual, that would simply be the president exercising his constitutional authority to execute the laws as he sees fit. But functionally, yes, it collapses the traditional distance between political will and law enforcement.
Yeah.
It suggests that policy can and should dictate prosecution.
Okay, let's move to another one. Case study 2. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS.
The ideology for DHS is pretty straightforward. Total border control and an aggressive assertion of national sovereignty. But the problem, as the text sees it, is that DHS is this giant, sprawling agency created after 9/11. It does everything from cybersecurity to disaster relief to managing the Coast Guard.
It's a bit of a Frankenstein monster.
It is. So the administrative directive proposed is radical. Break DHS apart.
Break it apart. You mean dissolve it entirely?
No, strip it down for parts. The text argues DHS has become too bloated and has lost its core focus. So it suggests moving CISA, the cybersecurity agency, out, maybe to the Department of Transportation or making it independent. It suggests moving FEMA disaster relief over to the Department of the Interior.
Why do all that? What's the point of just shuffling the org chart?
It's not just shuffling. By stripping away all of these other missions, you are left with a leaner, meaner DHS that is focused almost exclusively on one thing: border enforcement and immigration.
It purifies the mission?
It purifies the mission. It removes the distractions of cybersecurity policy or hurricane response from the secretary's desk so they can apply a laser focus to the border. And to do that, they mentioned a very interesting tactic called soft closure.
Soft closure. It sounds gentle.
It sounds gentle, but it's a very powerful bureaucratic weapon. Let's say you're an administration that doesn't like an office Congress created. The law says there shall be an office for civil rights and civil liberties within DHS. You can't legally abolish it without Congress changing the law.
So what do?
You use soft closure. The text suggests you could take all the personnel from that office you dislike and reassign them to what they call workload-intensive areas. So you take the civil rights lawyers and you put them in a different building processing deportation paperwork.
So the office still exists on paper, the sign is still on the door, but the room is empty, and the people who used to do that work are now just scanning documents in a basement somewhere.
That's it, exactly. It's firing by reassignment. You hollow out the function of the office without ever having to get Congress's permission to close it. It's a way to kill a program from within.
Let's talk about the environment. Case study 3, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA.
The driving ideology here is what they call energy dominance and broad deregulation. The primary administrative directive proposed for day one is to create pause and review teams to freeze everything. But a very specific target is something called the social cost of carbon.
Right, this is a metric, a number.
It is a crucially important number. The social cost of carbon is a dollar figure that the government uses to calculate the long-term economic damage caused by emitting 1 ton of carbon dioxide. It tries to price in the future costs of floods, wildfires, crop failures, everything.
And how is that number used?
When the government wants to issue a new regulation, say for power plants, they have to do a cost-benefit analysis. They weigh the cost of the regulation to the industry against the benefit to society, which is calculated using the social cost of carbon.
So if the social cost of carbon is a high number, it justifies more stringent regulation.
Exactly. If you calculate that a ton of carbon costs society $190 in long-term damages, then spending $50 to prevent that ton from being emitted is a fantastic bargain for the country. The mandate says, get rid of this metric, abolish the working group that calculates it, or if you can't, set the value to near zero.
And if you set the social cost of carbon to 0,
then almost any environmental regulation looks ridiculously expensive. Its benefits are officially valued at nothing. You don't have to fight to repeal the Clean Air Act. You just rig the math so that no new clean air rule can ever pass the cost-benefit test.
the text also talks about restructuring the enforcement office at the EPA.
Yes. This is another one of those seemingly boring org chart changes with huge implications. It proposes merging the independent Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance back into the various program offices.
Explain that. Why does it matter where the enforcement lawyers sit?
Well, right now you have one group of people who write the permits for, say, chemical plants, that's the program office, and you have a completely separate group of people who act as the cops, who investigate and punish plants that violate their permits, that's the enforcement office. The separation is there to prevent conflicts of interest.
So this proposal would put the cops inside the same office as the permit writers.
Correct. The text argues this is about promoting compliance assistance, working with businesses to help them follow the rules rather than playing gotcha. But the structural outcome, as critics would point out, is that you have the fox guarding the henhouse. You remove the independent compliance check from the system.
Let's you one more. Case study 4. The Department of State. The diplomats.
The ideology here is very clear. The president, and only the president, determines foreign policy, not the career foreign service. The text is openly hostile to career diplomats, viewing them as a globalist elite who are not aligned with an America First worldview.
And the administrative directive to control them.
One of the first moves it suggests is to freeze the ADS, the Automated Directive System.
What's that?
The ADS is the State Department's internal Bible.
All right.
It's a massive, complex set of rules that governs everything from how an embassy is secured to how you file a diplomatic cable to the procedures for negotiating a treaty. The manual says to freeze it on day one, so that no career staffer can change any policy or procedure, no matter how small, without getting direct approval from a political appointee. It's an immediate lockdown on bureaucratic autonomy.
And you flagged something else here, a very technical term. C-175 authority.
Yes. This is deep in the bureaucratic weeds,
Mm.
but it's crucial for understanding how power can be moved around. C-175 is the formal process by which the State Department authorizes the negotiation and conclusion of international agreements. It's basically the State Department's license to negotiate on behalf of the United States.
Okay.
The text suggests that if the State Department is seen to be dragging its feet, if the diplomats are being obstructionist about, say, withdrawing from a climate treaty or a refugee agreement, the White House should use its authority to strip the C-175 power away from the State Department and give it to another, more compliant agency.
So you could have the Department of Homeland Security or the Department of Energy negotiating international treaties because the State Department is seen as too liberal to do the job properly.
Theoretically, yes. It's a mechanism for bypassing the entire institution of the Foreign Service if it's not seen as being aligned enough. It treats the State Department not as the traditional voice of America to the world, but as just one more federal vendor that can be fired if it doesn't deliver the product the White House wants.
I want to zoom out now. We've gone through the gears and the case studies, Schedule F, the OMB, C-175 authority. What are the broader structural implications of all this? For the person listening right now, why does this matter?
It matters because it reveals where the real battleground of modern governance is. We tend to focus on the visible things: elections, campaign rallies, floor debates in Congress. We watch the speeches on TV. But this document shows that the real consequential fight is happening in the pages of the Federal Register.
The Daily Journal of the U.S. government, the Book of Rules and Regulations.
Exactly. The mandate is a playbook for fighting and winning on that battlefield. It shows that modern governance is a fight between continuity and disruption. Normally, the government runs on autopilot. There's an institutional lock-in, where agencies just keep doing tomorrow what they did yesterday. This document is a braking system and a new steering wheel, designed to override that autopilot immediately.
And it really highlights that personnel isn't just about hiring people for jobs. It's about leverage.
Personnel is leverage. That's a perfect way to put it. The acting loophole we talked about is part of it, but the broader pattern is the creation of this shadow cabinet of unconfirmed deputies who can run the government, which effectively severs the day-to-day operational link between the legislature and the administration.
And finally, it shows how procedure, how boredom itself can be weaponized.
Procedures is power. It's the ultimate weaponization of boredom. Things like cost-benefit analysis, OIRA review, guidance documents, these topics make most people's eyes glaze over. They sound tedious and technical, but that's where the power lies. If you control OIRA, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs within OMB, you can kill any regulation you dislike by simply demanding endless cost-benefit analyses.
We can't pass this new clean water rule until we've completed another 3-year study on its potential economic impact on the manufacturers of small novelty boats.
Precisely. You don't have to win the argument on the merits. You just bury the proposal in procedure. It turns the bureaucracy's own love of process into a weapon against itself. It uses the system's own immense weight to crush it.
This connects so directly to the central theme of this channel, to crisis in perception.
It absolutely does. The crisis here is the massive gap between what citizens think governs them and what actually governs them.
We think we're governed by laws, by the Constitution, by things debated in public. We have this Schoolhouse Rock image in our heads of, I'm just a bill.
But in reality, our daily lives are shaped far more by agency memos, personnel classification systems, and internal org charts. There's a profound perception lag. You look at the building that says Environmental Protection Agency on the front, and you perceive a static, neutral institution. You think, that's the EPA. Its job is to protect the environment.
Right.
But this document shows how easily that institution can be completely re-engineered from the inside. You don't need to pass a single law or change the sign on the building to fundamentally alter what that building does.
It's the ultimate perception crisis. We see a building and assume a function, but the internal wiring has been completely changed to make it do the opposite.
And the concept of efficiency is used as the perfect camouflage. It always is. When you hear a politician promise to streamline the EPA or bring efficiency to the civil service, it sounds like good, sensible management. Who could be against efficiency? But what this kind of structural analysis shows is that streamlining is often just a code word for removing checks and balances in order to concentrate power. It is more efficient, yes, but a dictatorship is the most efficient form of government. Checks and balances are, by their very nature, inefficient. They're speed bumps. This is a plan to pave them over.
That's a very sobering thought. As we get ready to wrap up, what's the big reflective takeaway here? We've deconstructed this 900-page manual. When we step back and look at the whole thing, what does it help us see?
I think it helps us see the immense power of pre-assembly. The central argument of this entire project is that power must be meticulously organized before authority is ever granted. You cannot win an election, walk into the White House on January 20th, and then ask, okay, so how does this thing work? You have to arrive with the new wiring diagram already drawn and the electricians ready to go.
And it underscores that systems, in the long run, are more powerful than personalities.
Exactly. The media, the pundits, we all love to focus on the person running for president, their personality, their rallies, their latest tweet. This document is almost entirely indifferent to personality. It focuses on the 4,000 other people who will actually be the government. It's a profound reminder that governance is often invisible. It happens in the background, until one day we wake up and find that it has already been normalized.
The administrative state isn't a building in Washington, D.C. It's a set of rules.
It's a set of rules, and the rules are rewritten by the people who show up with a plan.
This analysis was based on Mandate for Leadership, The Conservative Promise, published by the Heritage Foundation. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a shorter visual overview, see the mini explainer linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.